Welcome to Tales She Told Me, a podcast featuring ordinary women who have overcome and done extraordinary things. I'm your host, Farah Haydar. Joining me today is Sherry Shaban. At 16, Sherry was hit by a car and nearly left paralyzed. She would have her first back surgery before she was 17. Despite this setback, she was committed to fitness and later became a gym owner, only to find herself in the hospital undergoing another back surgery. Unable to demonstrate a single squat, she was frustrated with herself, disappointed and angry for being a victim of her circumstances. But her turning point towards recovery came from understanding that one of the central elements to transformation is to let go of debilitating and self limiting thoughts and to begin to rewrite a new story. She now coaches people from all walks of life on how to rewrite their own story and fall in love with fitness. So, Sherry, welcome to the show. I'm really excited to have you on here, and I can't wait to hear more of your story. I'm personally someone who has struggled to think of themselves as an athlete. So it kind of struck me when you said, like, everyone's an athlete. And I'm eager to get your perspective on that. But first, let's start at the beginning. You're 16 and you get hit by a car. What happened then?
It was the life-changing moment really for me because it was the first time that somebody told me I couldn't do anything anymore. And so when it all happened, it actually happened quite quickly. I was in boarding school at the time. I was in Switzerland and I was going downtown to buy Pearl Jam concert tickets with my roommate, and I didn't see the car coming. We were trying to catch the bus to come back on campus to check in on time. And all of a sudden, I found myself in the hospital. I remember I thought I saw a car coming towards me, but then when I woke up, I was in the hospital. And at first, it was just a concussion, and it was, come back to play whenever you're ready. I had abrasions on my face, but when I did come back to basketball practice at the time, I just started feeling excruciating pain going down my leg, and it really pulled me out of practice, and within a span of a few weeks, I was already at the doctor's office because at that point, I could no longer shower on my own, I couldn't walk on my own, and then to be in this space where suddenly I didn't have control over my body, I didn't have control over that sense of identity anymore, and to then undergo that first back surgery and be told I would never ever play sports again was one bitter pill to swallow because that's how I always knew myself. I was Sherry the athlete. I was in all sports. I was the varsity, sport, MVP. And I just, everyone knew me for that. And I will always have to outrun the boys in school or out push up them. And suddenly I was no longer this person. And so that was sort of my first experience with really having to almost reinvent myself. And to be honest, after that back surgery, I really was struggling to find a place where I felt that I belonged. And so that ended up looking like a crowd that my parents would like never ever approve of, and starting to do habits and pick up habits that didn't align with who used to be. And so I kind of went through that for a few years before I realized that I really don't like myself. I actually hate who I am. And I decided one day that I needed to make a change. And so it was my early 20s, and I was at that point relying on pain medication daily to really get through my day, to be able to even live a comfortable life. And the majority of my day revolved around my back pain. So how long I would sit in a car had everything to do with my back. How long I would sit in a chair had everything to do with my back. How long I'd walk for. It was always about this back pain that was really the center of my life. And so I walked into the gym, even though I was told I should never lift weights, I should never exercise, I have to stop all sports. Just something about that just didn't resonate with me. And so I started copying people around me. I had no idea what I was doing at that time. I was actually in the biochemistry and chemistry world. That's what I was studying. And then I slowly over the span of weeks just started to feel a lot better. Within a few months, I was pain free. I was able to come off of my pain medication. I bought myself a treadmill. I put it in my apartment and started to run 5 minutes at a time until eventually I built up to running an hour outside. And so that's really where I think my journey of reinvention began. And I became obsessed with learning everything about the human body, about biomechanics, about injury prevention and recovery. And if I was able to do this with the diagnosis that I had, then I needed to help other people do the same thing. And so that essentially started my path, and really this obsessive nature that I had around really learning everything I could. And I took many different courses. I dropped out of chemistry. I was doing a master's degree in chemistry at McGill University at the time. I went back and started a brand new bachelor's degree in exercise science. I specialized in athletic therapy. Later, I became an osteopath. And that's essentially where this drive came to help people understand that self-image is everything. And whatever we think about ourselves, whether that's what we think or someone else told us, becomes our truth and essentially becomes the rules and the principles with which we live life by. And so that's sort of also where that word athlete sort of stems from. And oftentimes if you follow my Instagram or follow my YouTube channels and my workouts, I always say, "What's up, athletes?" or "Welcome back, athletes," or on my podcast, Fall in Love with Fitness. I always refer to everyone as athletes. And I oftentimes get that backlash with, "What are you talking about? I'm not an athlete." And here's the thing, and the reason why I always use the word athlete is because athlete is a mindset, right? An athlete doesn't focus on diet and exercise punishment because they don't like how they look. An athlete tracks their progress. An athlete focuses on their lifestyle. They focus on the quality of their sleep, the quality of their relationships, who they spend time with. They would turn down a night of partying if they had a big workout or training to do the next day. And so when we get out of that diet and exercise rat race where we're so struggling really with our self image and aligning self worth with self image, and start to get into that space where if I start to view myself as an athlete, I'm going to start to do things in such a loving way. The way, in fact, I'll start to speak to myself becomes very different. And ultimately, that transforms my self image. And when I start to view myself in a very new light, then my behavior follows whoever I think I am. Because we have thoughts, and thoughts lead to emotions, and the emotions drive our behavior throughout the day. So if my thoughts are, "I hate the way I look. I don't like how I look. I'm so fat. I'm so gross. I'm so disgusting. I'm so weak. I'm so out of shape. I'm so lazy," then that gives us a particular emotion that is very disempowering. And then that drives the behavior, which will support that self image. And so, learning really just to understand who you are, what is that voice in your head constantly telling you? And where does that voice come from? Is that me? Is that my parents? Is that my environment? Who told me all these things? Because ultimately, those become the rules with which I live my life. And so understanding where I am right now in terms of my self image and then where I want to be is not about the doing, but it's about the being. Who do I need to be to do all these things versus how many calories do I need to eat or how much exercise do I need to get to release weight? If I start to simply change the way I view myself, then everything changes. And so that's truly been my life story in many, many ways, from overcoming multiple back surgeries, from losing my gym during COVID and having to bring everything online and really almost reinventing and rebranding myself. That idea that we can become whoever we are if we want to, if we desire it, if we believe in it, and if we focus on transforming our self image, truly makes us limitless and makes us capable of anything at all that we desire.
So, okay, so I have a lot to unpack in that. But I'm going to bring it back a little bit to your story. So, in the US, we have like high school athletes, right? Like and you said you were in Switzerland at the time, but was that your kind of mantra? You were a high school athlete destined to maybe go and play college athletics, or were you just someone who was just really into fit?
Yeah, at that time I was a child athlete. I even, when I was younger, I grew up as a competitive swimmer, and I was always a high performance athlete. And I think the moment that I stopped referring to myself as an athlete, I needed to find a new identity. And today I don't compete. I don't compete at that level. In fact, the training that I do, the way that I eat really has everything to do with who I am, and not just that competitive nature. But what I have adopted from that childhood mindset was that belief system that you truly are limitless when you start to absorb those same rituals that athletes have. And it's not about, making millions of dollars a year playing a sport that makes you an athlete, but it's really about being that in that mindset, because you can be a recreational athlete, you can be a professional athlete, or you could just do it leisurely. but we all are athletes and we all have that identity. And it's as simple as deciding to step into that, that truly frees us.
Okay. So, all right. So you got hit by a car. You're told you can't lift. Why do you think they said that to you, given that you had so much success later lifting? I mean, why do you think that diagnosis was it just maybe the medicine hadn't progressed enough?
Yeah. That's such a great question. And I have to tread so cautiously because I come from a line of doctors. Both my parents were doctors. My brother is a doctor. And I think we have this thing in society where we feel, the truth comes from doctors. And I've seen this so much. And I've started, working with a lot of athletes also in the last years who were coming off diets that were prescribed by their doctors. And so what's interesting about that is just understanding that information really comes from a place of legitimacy. And we receive that information when we feel that it's legitimate, when it's coming from someone who we feel has the right or that authority to tell us that information. But what I'll always tell people is I wouldn't take advice from somebody who's not doing that thing that I want to do. And so if I am in the doctor's office and I'm speaking to a doctor who does not exercise and he's giving me advice about exercise, I just have to not doubt him, but maybe I need to look for a second opinion. If I'm sitting in an office with somebody who's, even as, let's say, a physiotherapist who's telling me to stop running, but they don't run, then maybe I have to find a physio who does run and get advice from them. And so I think it's really comes from that place of authority, Farah, where that person has the right and us as really just the public feel that that is truth because it's coming from that hierarchy that we've established in society. I think we just have to question that. And so when that was said to me, because it came from doctors, that's why I listened. And then as I started to just get older and wiser, I started to question, well, does he exercise? What is his experience in exercise? Because maybe I have to actually just see for myself how things feel. And the body has this beautiful innate capacity to heal itself, and it is so resilient. And the one who knows best is the person who's in that body. And so if we learn to tap into that intuitive signaling, we're really able to judge for ourselves what feels right and what doesn't feel right for us.
Okay. So thank you for that. So you come over, you decide to defy doctors, right? And you start to lift, and then you open a gym, and you end up being rushed to the hospital. Can you tell us what happened? And
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. So coming back to what I was saying, the body has this signaling mechanism where it tells you, hey, something is wrong. And that's really what was going on for months. And so this was a period of my life where I had just had kids. My kids were super young. I had strollers, I had car seats, I had all these things. And I was under an immense amount of stress that I had imposed on myself because I wanted to open my gym at a particular date. I had deadline for myself and a lot of physical work. So I was lifting a lot of things and I was getting the cues. At first it was moderate back pain. And of course, I've got a deadline. I have to keep going. And so I kept pushing myself to be able to meet that deadline. And then the cues got louder and my back was now in more pain. And I had to start taking medication to suppress that pain on certain days. And then the pain traveled down my leg. And so that was the learning experience for me was the signs were there. I should have backed off when I first had that moderate pain, but I didn't. And this is something that we see obviously happening to all of us when our body is giving us the cues about different ailments in that's going on or different symptoms and we continue to ignore it. And so essentially, Farah, it came from a place of stubbornness and trying to override the cues that were given to me that really put me in that place again. But it never happened again. I could definitely tell you it was a learning experience that really made me honor my body and just really respect the signals that it is constantly giving me.
yeah. So you were just so I guess you had moved something or misplaced something while you were doing all this physical work, being prepared.
I remember the moment. So it was really, it was gradually just starting to get more and more severe. And I remember the day we had maybe a week or so until we had to open because I said this is the day that we had to open and I wasn't listening to my body. but I was actually sanding a plyometric box. So I wasn't actually lifting anything. I was bent over for a long period of time, just sanding this big box that people would jump on. It was a CrossFit gym. And the moment I stood up, I collapsed and that was it. The pain going down my legs was, oh my God, it was intolerable. And I've given birth twice, and I'll tell you that I would choose to give birth every single day for a month than to ever endure that type of pain again. But that was the day I was rushed to the hospital by ambulance. This was a Wednesday, and by Friday I had an emergency surgery because I was just a couple millimeters away from cauda equina, and so it was just fatigue and just
Oh,
overuse and if in fact abuse of my body and my back that really brought me to that place.
so what is cut of quina? Sorry, I don't know if I pronounced that correctly, but what is that?
Yeah. So there's this lower portion of the spinal cord that is responsible for a lot of the functions that we have in our bowels, in our bladder, and even just connection with some of the structures in the leg. And cauda equina happens when the disc herniates centrally, basically on the spinal cord. So normally whenever we have a herniated disc, the disc squeezes out to the side, and that's how we'll feel it on one side, like on one leg. But cauda equina is central. So this is now everything from that area down. And so had I pushed more, had I not gone to the hospital at that time, I could have ended up in a wheelchair. I could have ended up having to use a diaper for the rest of my life, not being able to control my bowels. And then everything obviously in that area that is a very important part of life would be impacted.
Well, glad it happened. Let's put it that way. Very, very glad
Me
it did.
too.
I'm sure. Um, so let me ask you something. So go into this gym and you say, okay, at this point, I shouldn't be lifting, but I'm going to lift. Um, how has your journey been since that? Since that time, because you said I walked in, I didn't know what I was doing. Because I think being a child athlete is a little different than walking into a gym and lifting,
Right.
right? Like a child
100%.
athlete, you're training in a specific sport. They're so flexible, durable, it's a different fitness changes, I think, as you go through your age, right? So I guess I get to go back to the question, which is what made you think like, okay, how did your journey happen from there? You went in, you maybe lifted some light weights. Then what happened? How did you gain confidence over time?
Yeah, it was really just modeling others. And, the first few weeks I really was like, what's that person doing? Oh, leg, that looks like it's for legs. And I would just kind of copy them. And, with in terms of the weight that I was using, I was always using my back as a cue. So if I would lift something and it would feel uncomfortable for my back or I'd feel tension in my back, then it wasn't right for me. And so when you walk into the gym too, there's a lot of sort of, standstill machines. And I was using a lot of those. So, sitting on a machine and pushing with my legs or pushing with my arms and not really loading my spine. And so that's what sort of helped me get started. And then eventually, as once I started to feel that chronic pain disappearing and started to feel stronger and more stable in my body and more confident in my body in terms of how much I can use it or when I should back off, that's when really I needed the education now to support it. And one of the first things I signed up for was a fitness training certification at my local YMCA just to learn what are the exercises and what are the different body parts? And then I got into anatomy. And then that really just became hardcore, full blown when I basically dropped out of chemistry and then went into exercise science because now I was really learning everything there was about biomechanics and injury prevention and insertions, origins, innervations of different muscles and really just understanding the human body in a more deep and global way.
So you mentioned that your parents were doctors as well as your brother. I'm sure they were very happy with your chemistry
Mhm.
thing. And then you're saying, okay, no, I'm going to drop out to do exercise science. And, despite my back, despite everything, did you get a lot of pushback?
Oh my goodness, yes. First of all, I was expected to be a doctor just like my other 3 siblings were, right? As I mean, And so I didn't end up becoming a doctor, so the best, next best thing was, okay, at least she's in science, like, that's good, it's all about the degrees and education. Farrah, I feel like you understand. And so that went on. But what's so funny is I've built a successful business helping transform thousands of people's lives. And my dad will always still, so Sherry, when are you going to stop jumping around and, open a clinic? Like he still legit still asks me this. So when will you stop, just messing around and all this health and fitness stuff and like maybe open yourself a proper clinic and, you're like a doctor. It's so funny. But I think that's again, that just comes back to mindset and just their perspective of the world. And so to answer your question, no, it wasn't taken very seriously, but I can tell now, and especially as I'm aging and in my 40s, and just what the way I think I've preserved my health, and more importantly, just overcome pain that somebody else in my position would not be able to do 90% of the things that I do. I think that starts to now, get a lot of eyes and people asking questions and just noticing that, oh, then maybe there is something to it, right?
Yeah. I mean, did you have a moment during your journey where you're like, hey, I'm holding myself back. I can push harder. I can, because obviously that mindset probably was built over time, right? You didn't wake up one day and say, oh, I have this wonderful mindset. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that, like some of those aha moments you had.
Yeah, thank you for bringing this up because, I get a lot of, oh, you're so lucky from the outside, and oh, how did you get your six pack? And, you must be eating a certain way and all these things, and it just must come naturally to you. And it doesn't, and the truth is when this whole thing was happening to me, that's what I thought. It was happening to me, and I was extremely embarrassed. In fact, when I had just opened my gym and had my second back surgery for a good year, I was the owner who walked in and just like lay down, put a mat down on the floor and laid down, or put my treatment table, opened it up and just laid down on it because I was unable to even stand for so long. And so I actually felt like a fraud. I felt like a phony. At social functions, when people asked me what I did for a living, I didn't like to tell them I was a gym owner or I was a coach because I didn't feel like I modeled that. And so it really did take some time. And the first thing was just accepting where I was. And it was, okay, maybe I can't lift like other people, or maybe, I'm not in that space where I can compete and I have to respect my body. And so instead of focusing on the things that I cannot do, maybe I could start focusing on the things that I can do. And the moment that started to shift, instead of focusing on the few things that I couldn't do, and then really just open it up to creativity. And now that I can do all these things, what can I do with it? That's really what started to set me free. And so I even created a workout program based on that, and I ended up having this massive group in my gym at the time called Transformation Tribe, where it was just body weight and just offering so many women amazing results, not having to lift heavy weight, but using their own body weight as weight. So definitely did open up the doors to creativity, but it did take time. And I noticed that when I started sharing my story slowly, especially the part where I was embarrassed and didn't want to tell people that I have this back condition, that's where I truly started to connect with people and realize we all have something we struggle with, and everyone has a different condition. It could be a struggle with trauma from the past. It can be a struggle with weight loss or just finding that place of self love. It could be a struggle with a physical ailment. And it's gone on to really help me support so many different people with different obstacles, as I call them, those who are struggling with MS or those who have cerebral palsy. Everyone can become that athlete if they choose to change that identity, change that mindset. And that really has to be a transformation from things happen to me, I am the victim of the circumstance, to things happen for me. And that is the story that I'm using to help impact thousands of people. And that's truly what it was. And if you look back at the most amazing thought leaders or the most amazing influences, truly like Tony Robbins or Oprah or anybody who's really made massive impact in the world, they didn't have everything offered to them on a silver platter growing up. They actually went through massive struggles and massive obstacles. And you have to get to that place so that you can connect with people's emotions. You can connect with what they're going through. And only then can you truly help them. And so I'm so incredibly grateful for everything that's happened to me. So incredibly grateful that I'm able to walk. And I thank God every single day just to have this body that is healthy, that is breathing for me every single day, and also so incredibly grateful that I was hit by a car and that I've had back surgery and I have all of these traumas that I've had to deal with, that I've had to overcome, because that's truly what helps me connect with others and helps me create that impact and influence.
So you mentioned during that you opened the gym, then during COVID, you had to close it. I believe at
Mhm.
the CrossFit gym, correct?
Yes. Mhm.
Okay, so you had to close this CrossFit gym, rebrand yourself, go online, all that. So I have a couple of questions. I'm going to give you all of them. Maybe you could help.
Yeah.
So first, my question is: CrossFit to me is highly competitive. It's very push, push, push. What I'm hearing from you is a little less of that than the push, push, push of CrossFit. And then no criticism of CrossFit. I've done
Yeah.
CrossFit. It definitely. I mean, oh my God, I know so many people have benefited from it. Um, but I feel like maybe as you've evolved, your perspective on it has evolved. Is currently, do you still kind of teach in the CrossFit style first? And second, do you now have a physical space or are you completely online?
Yeah. This is a really, really powerful question, Farah. And you know, at the end of the day, CrossFit is not this brand new training regimen. And I'm not pushing for CrossFit, and I'm not against it in any way. But what I did find, when I found CrossFit, was a more intelligent way of grouping things together. And so CrossFit is about high intensity functional movements that are constantly varied. And that's really what it means. And that's a lot of, blah, blah, blah. But essentially, the high intensity part is relative to the person, meaning I'm going to work out at an intensity where I'm having a hard time speaking, but it's going to be for a short amount of time. And then the movements will be functional, meaning they're going to be something that are useful to my day to day life, right? I'm not just going to do a bunch of bicep curls because that's just working one muscle group, but this will help me run faster, climb up the stairs better, go to Costco, be able to lift up my big heavy bags and put groceries away up overhead without feeling the struggle. And then the constantly varied part also is just that element of surprise, that there's this constant throwing the body off so that it continues to adapt to new things. Sometimes your workouts are 3 minutes long, sometimes it's 12 minutes long, and you're just able to adapt to those things. So when I found CrossFit, none of the concepts were new. In fact, we were already doing HIIT training, we were already doing plyometric, functional training, so kind of brought everything together. And now there is this massive stigma that CrossFit is dangerous and people get injured with CrossFit. But I'll tell you, as an osteopath, I've treated way more runners and cyclists and endurance athletes who are doing this repetitive, sort of monotonous movement and creating injuries because of it than I have actually treated CrossFit athletes. And so with that, there is a competitive nature, yes, but the competition also varies from gym to gym. So let's say your goal, Farah, was to compete in the regional games or the local games, or maybe even go to the CrossFit Games one day. My gym would not have been ideal for you because I didn't choose to work with high level athletes. I chose to work with regular population. The majority of my clientele were moms who brought in their babies, right? And so CrossFit is very adaptive and every single gym is different. You would call a personal trainer, and before you'd sign up there, you'd call maybe another four or five, go check out the gym, go see how you feel and feel like if it's the right environment for you. And so the athletes that would come to my gym, and remember, I call everyone an athlete, the athletes that would come to my gym didn't necessarily align or feel comfortable in a gym that was highly competitive, that did bring athletes to, let's say, the high level competitive sort of nature that they were really focused on. And so this really should just be a learning experience for anyone in the general population, is just to ask a lot of questions and get a feel for it. Before I sign up and invest my time and energy and money into something, is it for me? And I'll be able to tell if I come in and I work with the trainers and I see how they pay attention to me. Are they telling me to push harder and my form looks terrible because it's all about going faster and lifting heavier? Or are they telling me to stop down, to slow down? Are they telling me to strip the bar and lower my weights? And that's what you would see at my gym. I would slow people down. I would tell people that's too heavy for you. I would interrupt their training if I saw that their form was bad. And that also came from my athletic therapy background. That came from my osteo background. And of course, the fact that I was like an expert in back injury and back pain. And so, it's so important that before we just go ahead and buy into something and sign up for something, that we ask a lot of questions and more importantly, see how we feel. And especially if we're looking for that environment where we want more attention, we want someone to really be guiding us and watching us.
So mm, you, what do you think more important when it comes to your fitness? Is it consistency or just pushing, doing really hard things?
Well, it's interesting because the pushing, doing really hard things is the consistency part, right? Because the hardest part of the workout is just showing up, right? And
Mhm.
so that's really the hardest part. If you're able to show up, you've got it. And so consistency is what drives results. And we have this nature, especially maybe what we see on social media or this constant feeling of comparison with others, where when we do start something new or we start to focus on our health and fitness for the very first time in a long time, we automatically seek out intensity. And that's really hard to sustain. We decide, okay, I'm going to start running. So I'm just going to go from 0 to 5K in just this week, right? Instead of just getting into that habit. So the first thing is really getting into that systematic habitualness of that activity before we start adding on the intensity. And I'll always tell my athletes, start with even 2 minutes a day. What would happen if you walked for 10 minutes a day? What would the impact be on your body? Before deciding that this is something for me that I want to take on, why don't we get curious about it? What would happen if, for 28 days I drank more water, or for 28 days I got 8 hours of sleep, or for 28 days I stopped eating 3 hours before bed, or I did an hour walk, or I hit 10,000 steps, and just get super, super curious about that. But to get to that place, it has to start by small incremental steps. And we say that the goal is to become 1% better every day. Not 100% better, but 1% better every day. That means one more squat, not 70 more squats. And that's what throws us off. In fact, that's what turns us off because we don't allow ourselves that adaptation period. So before we take on the activity, we have to make space in our schedule. We have to make it a habit. And that is the first step is really, can I create consistency around this? Can I create consistency around going for a walk every day or doing a small workout every day? And the workouts I share on my YouTube channel are a great example because they're 5 to 12 minutes long max. And that's really all you need. If you did just one of those workouts every single day, that require really very minimal equipment, just maybe a pair of dumbbells, you would start to see progress. And we can make time for 5 minutes a day. And again, that just thinking of that hurdle that really keeps us from committing to something or staying consistent is just the showing up part. And so I have a tendency to trick my brain when I feel that way because it's natural. We all feel that way. We all have that voice saying, just sit on the couch. You don't need to do this. And my trick really is, okay, I'm either going to start my workout lying down, which is like, okay, at least I get to lie down and relax so I could do some sit ups or something like that. Or I tell myself, okay, I'm going to train for only 2 minutes. That's it, 2 minutes, no more. And if I feel like quitting at that point, I will. If I want to go for a walk and I don't feel like it, I tell myself, okay, just a couple minutes. I'm just going to put on my coat, walk down the street and come back. And if I don't feel like continuing, I come back and I'm not upset at myself and I honor myself for trying. And then before you know it, you're into it and you're feeling it. And so really it's focusing on the consistency that is the most important thing. And when you feel comfortable with it and it fits into your schedule, then you can start to challenge yourself with that extra weight or go a little bit faster if that feels right for you.
Yeah, I always tell people also try to link it to something pleasurable, right? Like
Yeah.
I used to, so when I started getting up earlier and working out and stuff like that, I would always link it to something pleasurable. Like I'm going to get up and I'm going to journal. And I made it really like luxurious. Like there were candles and incense and
Oh, I love
beautiful
that.
cup of coffee. But if I got up and did that, then the next thing I'm going to do is go for a walk. Right.
Mm.
So it was always linked to something pleasurable. Or I'm going to go for a walk after dinner and listen to my favorite podcast, like something like that. Right. Like, so I always link it to something pleasurable. But having said that, you brought up a couple of things like about food and water and sleep and stress. And I know from researching you a little bit that you say you're anti-diet. I do, but I'd love to hear your perspective on that, on anti-diet.
Yeah. So, dieting and especially just us being in the society where diets are bombarded at us, we have to ask ourselves that simple question. How can we be in this Western society where food is abundant, where information is abundant, and yet we are the ones struggling the most with weight, overweight, obesity related conditions, and other diseases. And so the reason for that is because we've started dieting. And it's not about the carbs that we're eating, because we can go to a third world country and see that they're eating rice all the time. In fact, almost every single third world country lives off of rice and potatoes and bread. And that is nutritious for us. And so when we've started dieting, what we've done is we've bypassed this body's natural intuition that it has, the signaling to tell us when we're hungry and when we've had enough. And if you're a parent or you're a pet owner, you resonate with this, because when I had my girls and they were hungry when they were babies, they would cry and you would give them food. And the moment that they felt satisfied, that was it. They would stop eating and they didn't want anymore. You couldn't even give them one more drop. That was it. That's all they wanted. And then once the brain started to develop, and especially the frontal lobe, and we start to become aware of body weight and body image, and maybe someone told us comments, or maybe we're supposed to look a certain way, or whatever that brought us to this place of dieting, we started to create all of these rules around food. There was one diet where we started and told ourselves, okay, by the time it's done, then it's over and I can have whatever I want. And so we started adapting to these restrictive cycles where we would deny ourselves from certain foods, which we demonized bad because the science behind this diet told us it was bad. And when we were done with that diet, we felt confused. We felt denied and deprived of certain foods, and we started eating those things and then eating them in a way where it started to become out of control. And the more we diet and the more we get into one diet after the other, the more confused we feel, because carbs here are bad, and this one says fats are bad, and this one says animal products are bad. And this one says we shouldn't eat at all. And this one says we shouldn't have any plants because plants are trying to kill us. And now we're in the space where we're super, super confused and super uncomfortable around food. And what happens is we build these out of control eating behavior cycles where we are triggered by stress, where we're triggered by emotion, where we're triggered by restrictions and dieting. And we no longer are in touch with that intuitive capacity that we once had to tell us when it was time to eat and when it wasn't. So I have to admit that I struggled with binge eating for a small period of my life, especially as I got into the nutrition world. And not because I was trying to release weight, but really because I was reading too much. And this diet said this was good and this was bad. And here's the science. And this one said the same thing. And here's the science. And so then I would go through these massive restrictions. I had so many rules around food, and I would find myself, if I would have something that was off limits in that diet or according to my rules, I'd find myself starting to feel out of control. And now that I'm here, I may as well eat all the things because on Monday I'm starting this back up again. And this is really where it's at. So our body is able to tell us, just like it's able to heal itself, what it desires and what it doesn't. And we have to ask ourselves, what are the rules that I am living by? And how have they been serving me? And so this whole anti-diet movement is really coming into that awareness of yourself, that mindfulness, where you are starting to feel how foods affect you instead of what this app is telling you, instead of the amount of macros I should be following or the amount of calories I should be following. And so I work with athletes with my program, Make Peace with Food, where we go through a 6-month period where essentially we rewire the brain entirely. We get to the root cause of what those triggers are that put us in that cycle. And so people who are stress eating, emotional eating, binge eating, who have a disordered eating pattern are able to overcome this. And what's so interesting is that it has nothing to do with food and exercise. That is not the solution. But the solution is really uncovering those emotions and the triggers and the traumas that have brought us to that place where we're truly looking for an immediate source of pleasure and a cover up for not being able to handle a particular emotion that we are going through.
Yeah, I mean, we could talk about this for hours. I mean, that's a huge. You covered in like 2 minutes a very very large topic that I know
Right.
a lot before. So I appreciate that from you. I am looking at the time and I want to make sure I get you out of here on time. So I'm going to end with this question, which is a question I ask all my guests, and it is: what is a weird habit or ritual you have that makes your life more joyful?
Okay. So I'm going to admit this. I have this weird thing with the bathtub. It may stem from my childhood, but I have this thing where I need to take a bath every single day. And the other part of that is I love to eat in the bathtub. So I'll prepare myself, eggs and maybe an omelet and then a nice bowl of oats. And then I'll set up my bathtub with Epsom salts and I'll put my candles. And it's just like coming home to this warm, warm space. And I think my mom used to do that when we were little, and she'd put us all in the bath and then she would make us these little melted cheese sandwiches. So I think I get a little bit of that hominess and that source of pleasure from there. But definitely something I've kept to myself for a long time, Farah. I hope there are other weirdos like me out there who eat in the bathtub, but I always feel like Kramer. I don't know if anyone's ever watched that Seinfeld episode, Kramer eating and washing his dishes in the bathtub,
Yeah.
but also try it. I would
Yeah.
also recommend
Yeah.
it.
Now it's on my bucket list. I'm sure there's someone else that does this 100%. Sherry, it was a pleasure having you. And if you're out there and you'd like to hear more from Sherry, you can connect with her at www.sherryshaban.com/transform or listen to her podcast, Fall in Love with Fitness. All links in the show notes below. As always, I'd love to hear from you about this episode. What does being fit mean to you? Hit me up on Instagram or Facebook at Farah Haydar. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you'll get notified when the next episode is available. Also, I'm giving away a PDF of some of the best quotes we've had on the show, beautifully designed to print and journal your thoughts. Email me at farah@farahhaydar.com and title it Quotes. Talk to you soon. Till then, chase your happy.